I'm James Rosone.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
Peacekeepers, Book 2 of the Falling Empires series, written by James Rosone and Miranda Watson, narrated by B.J. Harrison. Chapter 1. Oh, Canada. December 1st, 2020. Ottawa, Canada. Lord Elgin Hotel. Grill 41. Newly promoted Brigadier General Ryan Jackman sat across the table from the Governor of New York, Tim Shank. Jackman had a broad smile on his face and optimism in his heart as he admired the small box that contained 2 silver stars, the rank insignia he had just accepted. He would now be the combat commander to lead the recently established New York Civil Defense Force, or NYCDF. Jackman tried not to think about what he had given up for those shiny stars. This move had cost him his position in the New York Army National Guard as commander of the 1st Battalion, 69th Infantry Regiment, along with any loyalty he had previously held to the Pentagon under the command of President Sachs. Governor Shank returned Jackman's smile. "Congratulations, Ryan. You're officially a general. How does it feel?" he asked. "I've never been happier or prouder in my life than I am right now, Governor," General Jackman replied, with a voice that seemed to feign confidence more than demonstrate it. "My only wish is that I could have persuaded more of my soldiers to cross over with me," he said. Shank shrugged off the comment. "Don't beat yourself up over it, General. The fact that you were able to help convince more than 30% of the state National Guard to mobilize and stay true to their state is a testament to your leadership." The governor paused for a second as he leaned in and fixed the new general with a steely gaze. "We're in for some tough times ahead of us. It's obvious we're heading for a civil war, one that's been brewing for decades. After this meeting, you're going to be a fugitive, a hunted man like me. There won't be any going back once you take this position. If you want to back out, I'll understand. But once you're in, until we either win or lose. Is that understood?" Jackman was a bit taken aback by the governor's bluntness. He paused to reflect on his options. Heck, most of the state-elected officials have already fled across the border to Canada, he thought. Several Democratic governors had done the same. General Jackman concluded that if these politicians could stand up to President Sachs, then so could he. Returning Shank's unrelenting stare, Jackman replied, "This is my country too, Governor. We're going to win this fight." Governor Shank let out a sigh of relief and visibly relaxed his shoulders. "So, what do you propose we do next, now that you're in charge of the state's militia?" he asked. Jackman's mind spun. He smiled as he dreamed of ideas of how they would bring the Sachs administration to heel, or at least keep them out of New York State. December 5th, 2020. Ottawa, Canada. Lord Elgin Hotel. General Guy Mackenzie brushed the snow off his overcoat and handed it to one of the bellhops, who looked a bit royal in his black pants and red jacket with black and golden trim. The man added it to the cart with Mackenzie's belongings and waited for instructions about where to take it. Mackenzie looked the lobby over with a critical eye. The dark wood panel columns gave the location a very rich appearance, but the bright tile on the floor with ornate patterns along the side made the hotel seem warm and inviting. "This will do," he thought. When it had become clear President-elect Tate would need to set up his transition government in Canada, his campaign had worked with the Canadian government and the United Nations to secure and rent out all 355 rooms and suites at the Lord Elgin Hotel. The hotel sat conveniently just down the road from the Canadian Parliament building. It was large enough to accommodate the people who could be critical to Tate's government, and it had enough conference rooms that could be quickly turned into briefing rooms when needed. While General Guy Mackenzie was assessing the hotel's general appearance, he promptly noticed the visible presence of a sea of private security contractors. The guards appeared to be part of the Seneca Group, an Irish-based security firm that provides private security in hostile nations and caters to the protective detail needs of world dignitaries. They also had a paramilitary branch that handled the more difficult, dirty jobs, often associated with the Middle East and Africa. After passing through security, Mackenzie was escorted to the elevator bank and shown to the floor and the room where the newly elected American president would be staying. The security guard knocked on the door twice, then stepped back and made his way to the elevator, leaving Mackenzie to the charge of the other security guards on the floor. Marshal Tate heard the double knock on the door and got up from the chair where he had been waiting. He opened the door, smiling broadly. "President-elect Tate, it's good to see you again," said General Guy Mackenzie warmly. The two shook hands. "I was told you needed to see me in person," he remarked in a lower voice. Tate nodded, doing his best to maintain a solid poker face. "I did, General. Please, come on in. Let's walk back to the sitting room, where the others are." Mackenzie nodded and followed him inside. "I hope you don't mind us meeting in here," Tate said apologetically. "It's more private and away from prying eyes. I'm still not 100% sure how loyal everyone is that's come over to our side, so I'm trying to minimize who all is involved in some of the critical decisions that still need to be made in the coming weeks." "I can appreciate the secrecy," General Mackenzie replied. "I don't envy your position, and I know this has to be a terribly hard situation for you and your family." Tate nodded. "It has been incredibly difficult for my wife and children, but at least the kids are grown and on their own. I'm confident we'll get through it, especially with men like you and others to help guide us." After walking through the galley kitchen in the suite, they made their way into the sitting room. For privacy reasons, Marshall had closed the curtains blocking the floor-to-ceiling glass windows that would normally give anyone sitting in this room a spectacular view of the city. Waiting for them on the steel-gray couches were retired Admiral David Hill, who was going to be Tate's Secretary of Defense, and Paige Larson, who was going to become his national security advisor. Paige had previously been a senior figure at the CIA. She'd quit her post at the agency once she'd been named the president-elect's NSA. Both she and Hill brought a wealth of defense and intelligence experience to his national security team, something they'd need in the coming days. "Ah, I see you have your military advisors here," Mackenzie remarked. He made his way over and shook their hands, exchanging the usual pleasantries. Tate waited for a moment, then cleared his throat. "General, what we need to talk about next is a military question. I'll be frank, Mackenzie, I'm not a military man, and I don't understand the intricacies of our present situation." He paused for a moment, as if searching for the right words to say. "I never wanted to be in this position. However, we're here now, and we have to deal with it. I truly thought President Sachs would step down once he saw the UN and many other world leaders side with us. I had hoped he would see reason and agree to just retire, but I fear he's only digging in." He motioned toward his new NSA. "Paige told me that some of her former colleagues at the CIA informed her that Saxe is preparing the country for war. She said the intelligence apparatus of our country is being turned loose on the countries that are allying against him, and he's ordered the Pentagon to begin preparations to implement a military blockade of Canada. He's also preparing the military to meet our forces head-on if necessary. Tate sighed involuntarily. He couldn't completely conceal that he was having second thoughts about all of this. I believe our country is headed toward a nasty civil war, he stated solemnly. I'm not sure what can be done to stop it. If we do have to fight, I also don't know how we win. If Saxe does use military force, it seems that the majority of the United States military will side with him. I'm not sure your UN force is going to be much of a match. At least that's what Dave here thinks, he said, motioning toward Admiral Hill. General Mackenzie grimaced. He'd been hearing some similar information, but was not fully aware of the situation inside the American Pentagon. He turned to face Admiral Hill and Paige Larson. If you had to put a number on it, what percentage of the military do you believe is going to remain loyal to Saxe? He asked. Retired Admiral David Hill leaned in. I still have ears on the ground in D.C., and things don't look good, that's for sure. The SecDef and the Cabinet have rightly shown that this election was a fraud. While many people in the government and the military may not like or agree with Saxe and his policies, they are dead set against replacing him in this fashion. We're going to get probably close to 20 to 25% of people who will cross over, but that's largely the core group of people who have openly expressed disdain for Saxe and want to see the country remade according to the vision President-elect Tate has put forward. Mackenzie crossed his arms. Look, I can respect that many people in your country dislike Saxe, but if these people are crossing over simply because of this personal distaste, even though they agree the election was likely a farce, how can we trust them or know that their loyalties are going to be with our cause? He countered. Does it really matter, General? Asked Paige. At the end of the day, whether this election was legitimate or not, people are using it as a means of getting rid of Saxe, and frankly, that's all that really matters. Marshal Tate shot her a mortified look and held up a hand. Do you really believe the election was a complete farce? He asked. You believe what Saxe and his cronies have been saying about it being rigged is true? Isn't there even a slight chance that I actually did win legitimately? She tilted her head to the side. Her expression registered a mix of surprise and pity. I don't mean any disrespect, Mr. President-elect, but did you really think you won this election on your own? She asked. Paige shook her head dismissively. Of course it was a sham. You honestly think all those things happening the last 6 weeks of the campaign were coincidence? It was a well-engineered coup d'etat to get rid of that bloviating buffoon, and it worked. Or it should have worked. He wasn't supposed to find out about the postal workers who'd been handling over absentee and mail-in ballots, and we certainly didn't think he'd try and challenge the election results like he did, or impose martial law. He was supposed to just take it on the chin and retire to enjoy his billions. Tate sat there in stunned silence for a moment, taking in what Paige had just said. While he knew a lot of powerful groups and people had been working to help him defeat Saxe, he'd legitimately believed he'd won. He'd truly felt Saxe had been making all of this up as a means not to give up power. Her words were like a blow to his gut. What have I done? He thought, staring blankly back at Paige. You truly didn't know? She asked incredulously. Tate slowly shook his head. I knew some of the details, but I was told it was best if I didn't ask questions. That figures, Paige remarked. I'm sorry they kept you in the dark, Marshal. I truly am. I wasn't involved in the plan from the beginning. Heck, I was only made aware of most of it in the last year of the campaign, and really only got seriously involved once things started to fall apart. At that point, there wasn't much I could do to help right it, other than to keep tabs on what the administration knew and what they were doing. Regardless, Sachs had to be replaced, and the powers that be couldn't take a chance on a second electoral upset. Change had to happen, and it has. You just need to continue to take charge of things. There are more pieces of the puzzle being moved into position. General Mackenzie grinned. Wow, you had me fooled. I thought you were aware of what was going on, Mr. President-elect, he remarked, before shrugging his shoulders. It's okay. As Paige said, a lot of pieces are in motion now. It'll work out in the end. You just need to stick to your position and continue to lead the country, or at least the parts that are loyal to you. Turning back to face the Admiral, Mackenzie said, You believe that a lot of the active-duty military appears to be siding with Sachs. What about the portions that are going to flip? Do you know who they are? You know, what units or commands do they control, and what equipment will cross over with them? Retired Admiral Hill lifted his chin up. I've spoken secretly with Rear Admiral Harold Ward, the commander for Carrier Strike Group 11. They're still finalizing some maintenance issues in the Bremerton Naval Facility before they move back to Naval Station Everett, just north of Seattle. He told me the captain of the USS Nimitz and at least 20% of his officers and enlisted personnel will side with us. He's not sure yet how many other vessel captains will join him, but he's hoping he can convince at least some of them to cross over before they set sail to enforce Sachs' blockade. Mackenzie's right eyebrow rose in surprise. You mean the captain of a supercarrier may join us? He asked incredulously. Smiling, Hill nodded. Well, we have a few diversions that are going to be created to help with flushing the ships out of port before they're fully crewed. If the full crew were already on board, there'd be no way they could pull it off. The Admiral's goal is to remove the ship from being used against us. We obviously can't crew it, and the ship won't have its air wing, so it's not like we can use it in any sort of military sense. However, removing the ship from being a part of a blockade or military function that could have been used against us will be a huge political win for our side. It'll help to show the public that even the military isn't falling in line with that dictator. Mackenzie sported a devilish smile, which suddenly turned sour. If Sachs moves forward with this blockade, we could be in trouble. Will the current naval officers actually fire on our ships? Hill scratched his chin before he responded. I'm not 100% sure that they'll fire first. I know if they're fired upon, they won't hesitate to fire back, but as to whether or not they'll fire on ships attempting to run the blockade, I don't know. If they were issued a direct order, I'd say it's probably 50-50 that they would. Okay. What about the Atlantic side? Mackenzie asked. Hill nodded. The captain of the USS Colorado, which is a Virginia-class fast-attack submarine, is going to join our ranks. The captain and I were friends at the academy many years ago. Like the captain of the Nimitz, his ship is supposed to be a part of the blockade in a few weeks. He's also going to put to sea in the early hours of the morning with the crew he knows is loyal to our cause. Admiral Hill went on to tell them about a few more ships that might cross over. They wouldn't know the exact tally for a few more weeks, but he was cautiously optimistic that they might be able to peel away enough forces to convince Sachs that he should step down. The more Hill talked about these naval units crossing over, the more Marshal Tate could sense the tension in the room decreasing. Mackenzie was visibly more relaxed. Well, that certainly does make the situation on the naval side seem more palatable, Tate admitted. My bigger concern is the situation with the ground and air forces, though. What's our angle there? General Mackenzie nodded. When Sachs orders some of the Army's ground combat units or the Marines to head toward the U.S.-Canadian border, how do you propose we handle that? he asked Admiral Hill. "Are there other Army units that might also cross over?" Hill shook his head. "I don't believe we'll see any direct units change sides. It's a lot harder for Army and Marine equipment to change sides en masse than it is a ship. A pilot or two might switch and just fly their fighter across the border, but we aren't going to see battalions of tanks do that. We'll probably see a trickle of soldiers start to go AWOL and stop showing up to their home units, but I wouldn't count on any big chunks of ground equipment." General Mackenzie nodded. He didn't seem that surprised or disheartened by the answer. "What about the militia forces?" he asked. "How quickly can we raise them, and how reliable will they be?" "The governor of New York just announced the formation of his state's militia unit. A former National Guard commander is going to take command of it. The man's done a couple of combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, so he's competent. From what I gather, close to 30% of the state National Guard is rallying on him. Once a general call for support is issued, I suspect they'll probably raise maybe 10 or 20,000 volunteers. These will be green recruits. Some of them might have prior military service, so that'll help, but they will need training and equipping." General Mackenzie grunted. "I think we can handle the training at least," he asserted. "We'll get them carted off to the existing Canadian military training bases and begin to run them through a rough, shortened version of our basic infantry school. That way they'll be ready for combat much sooner than if we ran them through a standard training program." "Excellent idea," Hill responded. "I'll make sure we get this coordinated with the governor. I think you may want to get things ready at those bases, though. Once the call goes out, I suspect the other governors are going to want to do the same. We could suddenly find ourselves inundated with fresh recruits from across the country as people make their way north to join up." Marshal Tate tried to let the military experts handle this conversation, saying very little over the next few hours. The situation wasn't nearly as bleak when they left the room as when he had entered it, but the next month and a half, all the way up to January 20th, was going to make for some interesting times, to be sure. December 6th, 2020, Quebec, Canada. Canadian Forces Base, Bagotville. Just one day later, as General Guy Mackenzie sat in the small room with a few of his key air squadron commanders, he felt like General Norman Schwarzkopf, trying to figure out how to attack the fifth largest army in the world without getting his forces slaughtered. Preparing to fight the American military was no small feat, but if they were given the go order, then by God, he was going to do his best to land some crippling blows and hopefully achieve their political and military goals before the Americans could get organized and pound his forces into the dirt. After completing his review of the paper briefs that had been provided to him, General Mackenzie kicked off the meeting in earnest. "Lieutenant Colonel Jean Pegu, I was led to believe that your squadron is the best deep penetration squadron in the French Air Force. During a training exercise against the Americans in Europe, your squadron succeeded in penetrating their airspace and carried out a mock attack against Ramstein Air Force Base, no?" The lieutenant colonel didn't even reveal a hint of a smile. "That was a training exercise, General," he responded flatly. "This is a real mission you're asking me to plan. Do you know how hard it will be to penetrate American airspace if they know we're coming? They will have fighters on top of us before we even know what happens." "That's why I need you to begin running your squadron through practice scenarios straight away," Mackenzie countered. "You need to get them ready for a deep penetration strike through a heavily defended airspace. This mission shouldn't be any different than any of the previous deep strike missions you guys rehearsed, with NATO, against the Russians." "With all due respect, General, those missions were also done in coordination with the Americans, not against them. You're a soldier, General. I'm a pilot, and a good one at that. I'm telling you bluntly, a mission like this will get most of my pilots killed, if not our entire squadron." General Mackenzie paused for a moment. He saw the man's point, but he also knew that if his other plans were to have any chance of success, Jean's squadron had to succeed. Colonel, if you're given the order to carry out this mission, then I assure you there will be a massive air attack all across the American border. Our plan is to sufficiently distract them so that your group should be able to penetrate close enough to launch your missiles. What I need to know is if this type of strike is possible, and if it is, what type of support you'll need to make sure it works. Jean nodded, and then looked more closely at the map. His fingers traced a line to the target. Then an idea seemed to take hold. He grabbed a protractor and pencil and wrote out some distances on the map. A slight smile formed as he looked up at the general. "I think I have a way we can make it work," Lieutenant Colonel Pegu announced. Mackenzie's lips curled up at the corners, almost mischievously. The two of them discussed the plan for the better part of an hour before they parted ways. Once the general had finished talking with his French aviators, he walked down the hall to the tiny room being occupied by his Chinese People's Liberation Army Air Force liaison officer, General Shi, who had been assigned to his staff now for 3 months. She possessed a very unique set of qualifications. His French and English were both excellent, and he was also a pilot, so he understood the aviation challenge Mackenzie was facing. They had a lot to discuss. While the Chinese were largely going to focus their efforts on a southern front through Mexico, the Chinese Air Force was still going to maintain several squadrons' worth of fighters and anti-air artillery squadrons, with the European contingent in Canada. Mackenzie knocked briefly on the door to get the Chinese general's attention, and then he walked just inside the threshold. "General Shi, do you have a moment for us to talk?" he asked. She smiled and waved him over to sit down. "Of course, General. I always have time for the UN commander," he replied cheerfully. "How may China be of service to you?" he asked. "Thank you, General," Mackenzie replied. "What I want to talk to you about is rather sensitive. Can we please speak privately, just the two of us?" He surveyed the room carefully. This elicited a curious look from Shi, who nodded. He grabbed a notepad and proceeded to follow Mackenzie back toward his office. They both knew the Chinese Ministry of State Security probably had a bug in his office, if for no other reason than to keep tabs on him and his staff assigned to Canada. The Chinese and Canadians might be partners in this endeavor, but it didn't mean the two parties fully trusted each other either. The two of them made small talk as they walked through the headquarters building to Mackenzie's office. Once there, Mackenzie guided them to a set of chairs next to a small table he had in his office. As soon as she was seated, Mackenzie began. "General, I'm going to ask some questions, assuming China has a certain type of capability. You don't need to confirm what I'm saying to you. I just need to know if China could handle a very specific mission if it was handed to you." Shi's smile and soft demeanor changed and hardened a bit as he leaned forward. "General, you know my nation is committed to doing what we can in these troubled times. What is it you believe we are uniquely able to handle?" Mackenzie sported a crooked smile. "I need to know if your stealth bomber, the one that doesn't exist, would be able to deliver a bunker buster bomb." She lifted his chin up and paused, as if considering his words. Finally, he responded. "We have an aircraft that could accomplish this mission, if it were given some initial support, and it had the element of surprise on its side. But as to the bomb, our current bomb is heavy. So our bomber," he said, making air quotes with his hands, "can only carry 2 of them." Mackenzie thought about Shi's response. He knew they'd need at least 4 of these bombs for the mission he'd had in mind. Suddenly, he remembered something. The Russians have a unique thermobaric bomb, and I believe it weighs 7,100 kilograms. Could your hypothetical bomber carry 4 of them?" She rubbed his chin as he did some calculations in his head. A minute later, he explained, "It could, but I'd need to see the specifications for the bomb. Do you have a specific target in mind? If you're thinking of going after NORAD, I can assure you, neither the Russian nor Chinese bombs will penetrate it." General Mackenzie chuckled. "No, we aren't looking at NORAD." He pulled out a map, and Shee's left eyebrow rose in surprise. The two talked for about an hour about how the bomber would approach this target and what kind of support it would need to breach that far into American airspace. She wasn't sure he could get permission to use their new bomber for this mission, but he vowed to make every attempt to secure the go-ahead. "General, this would certainly go down in military history as one of the craziest bombing missions ever devised," he asserted. "I know," Mackenzie acknowledged with a smile. December 9th, 2020, Ottawa, Canada. Johann Baer had flown out to meet with General Mackenzie in person. There were some things that just shouldn't be discussed over any form of electronic communication. When Mackenzie had finished his brief, Johann felt his face contorting with the skepticism he felt. "How do you know it'll work?" he asked. "I mean, it looks like this would be a suicide mission." "Going to war against America is typically a suicide mission, Mr. Secretary," Mackenzie answered. "But if we are going to do it, then this plan gives us the best chance of chopping the head of the snake off and potentially ending this war before it really has a chance to get going." His demeanor betrayed a certain sense of annoyance. "General, if this war really does have to happen, do you believe this plan will end it swiftly, or will it prolong it?" asked Baer. He was starting to second-guess his plans. "That depends on whether we're successful or not," Mackenzie answered. "If we succeed, then I think it ends it before it spirals out of control. If we fail, though, you will have essentially kicked up a hornet's nest, Mr. Secretary. You can bet the Americans will be after blood. They will attack our forces in Canada mercilessly, and my country will bear the brunt of this retaliation." He took a deep breath and let it out with a huff. "We'll be ready to execute the military option when you tell us to, but I do hope you're able to negotiate a peaceful solution to this problem." Now it was Johann's turn to sigh. He looked at his general. "I'm not confident that a peaceful solution to this problem can be reached. My biggest concern right now is figuring out how we could neutralize the Americans fast enough so that they don't destroy our forces or retaliate against Europe, Russia, or China for their involvement in this effort." Leaning forward, Mackenzie fixed Johann with an icy look. "Sir, we're about to declare war on the most powerful nation in the world. You have to accept that they're going to strike back hard against the nations that are attacking them. What matters now is that we capture a lot of land rapidly. We need to get the people on our side and get them involved in this fight. We have to tear America apart from the inside out. If they somehow unify and rally around Saxe, then we're going to be in for a very tough fight." "All right, General, you've made your point. Then please proceed as if we are going to war with America. Plan for their counterattacks and do your best to mitigate them. As to this plan of yours, consider it a go. Oh, and General, if you shoot at the king, you'd better kill him." West Des Moines, Iowa. The more Pat looked at his Facebook feed, the more livid he became. He just finished watching a video showing his representative, Congresswoman Jessica Lane, giving a spirited speech calling the president a dictator who'd refused to accept the results of the election and leave. She openly supported the UN mission to remove Saxe, who she called the tyrant in the White House. Pat reached for his bottle of Jack and took a couple of long gulps, letting the liquid burn its way down to his stomach. "We have to do something about this," he thought angrily. He heard a quiet ding, looked back at his computer screen, and clicked on the Messenger app. A smile crept across his face. Finally, a meeting. It was 8:46 p.m. when Pat pulled into the parking lot of VFW Post 9127. He put his truck in park and got out. He glanced up at the sky, just a sea of stars, without a single cloud in sight. He walked toward the rear door of the lodge, his usual limp seeming more pronounced this evening for some reason. As Pat pulled open the door and headed to the bar in the rear of the building, he quickly realized that there were only 5 guys at this meeting of the 3%ers, including himself. "Glad you could make it, Pat. Take a seat," said his friend Joel. "We were just about to talk about our little problem." Pat smiled and pulled up the only chair left at the table. "Congresswoman Lane crossed a line the other day," one of the guys remarked. "She didn't just cross a line. She openly invited a foreign army into our country," Joel responded angrily. "She broke her oath to protect and defend the Constitution." Pat already felt his anger welling up. He stood back up and walked toward the bar. "I need a drink. Anyone else want one?" he asked. "Grab the bottle and some glasses," Joel said. Pat selected a bottle of Tennessee Fire, then pulled a 20 out of his wallet and placed it in the register. That ought to cover the cost, he thought. He placed the glasses down and filled each of them about halfway up before sitting down. After downing about half the glass he'd just poured, Pat demanded, "Are we just going to talk about this, or are we going to do something?" Some of the guys at the table seemed a bit hesitant, but Joel quickly answered, "We're going to do something." "Exactly what do you propose?" asked Doug, one of the squeamish guys. "We shoot up her office," Joel responded. "What? When would you propose we do that?" Doug inquired, his face a bit pale. "We do it at night," Joel explained. "That way no one will get hurt, but it'll send a message." "Coward," Pat retorted, venom in his voice. "What are you talking about?" Joel asked, a bit pained. He seemed surprised that Pat didn't agree with him. "Shooting up an office in the middle of the dark sends the wrong message. We need to take her out. She has a town hall in 2 days. I say we shoot her. That'll get it through the thick skulls of those politicians in Washington that if they want to invite a foreign army into our country, we're ready to take them on and defend our communities." There was a long pause, while the others at the table were silent for a moment. Pat wondered if all their tough talk in the past was just that, talk, or if they had the guts to actually do anything about it. Who would do it? One of the other guys, Bob, finally asked. He gulped down the rest of his Tennessee whiskey. "Certainly not you, Bob," Joel retorted. "You look like you're about to pee your pants." He laughed and the others joined in. The tension in the room seemed to break a bit after that. "I'll do it." "Pat, come on. Be serious," said Joel. "If you kill a congresswoman, the feds will be all over you and the rest of us." Pat shook his head. "I thought this was a group of action. I didn't realize everyone here lacked a spine. Y'all like to dress up and play army, go shoot some guns and talk crap about the government. But when the rubber meets the road, you guys shy away from getting your hands dirty. Don't you guys remember your oath of enlistment? Against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Lane's clearly crossed the line. A foreign army is building on both our northern and southern borders. And you guys are concerned about the FBI?" Joel held up a hand to calm his friend down. "Let's just take this one step at a time. We don't have to shoot her office up. If you want, we can firebomb it instead. The flames and damage will play well in the media. It'll send the message you're looking for. We can also show up at her town hall and pepper her with difficult questions. I can have my son record it so we can use it on YouTube." Pat looked at the others, disappointed. He realized they didn't have the stomach to do what needed doing. "Fine, I'll go along," he thought, but he made his own plans for after the town hall. "Okay, then let's firebomb her office tonight, before any of you chickens get cold feet." Joel surveyed the cautious faces around him, then replied, "Okay, let's do it." 3 hours later, Joel and Pat pulled up just short of the back alley of the storefronts where Representative Lane's congressional office was located. Pat looked at his friend and pulled an electronic device out of the center console, turned it on, and placed it on the dash of the truck. "What the hell is that?" Joel asked. "It's an electronic jammer," Pat answered, a bit condescendingly. "It'll interfere with the CCTV cameras and prevent them from recording us when we break in." Joel nodded, clearly wishing he'd thought of the idea himself. "All right then, time to suit up," he replied. The two of them donned rubber masks in the likeness of President Obama, then pulled on 2 layers of surgical gloves. Pat put his truck back in gear and began to drive down the alleyway. They drove past an H&R Block store, a law firm, and an Allstate insurance office before coming to the back of the office for Congresswoman Lane. "Make sure to take those 2 cameras out," Pat said. He tossed Joel a can of black spray paint. "I thought you said the jammer already took them offline," Joel remarked, obviously confused. "It did, but I want them to think it was the spray paint that kept them from seeing what happened, not the jammer," Pat explained. While Joel headed off to take out the cameras, Pat grabbed a specially designed pry bar and placed it next to the lock on the door. When he applied pressure, he saw the door frame bend just enough for him to pull the door open without having to break the lock or the frame. With the door slightly ajar, Pat placed the pry bar on the ground next to the door and then grabbed his can of gasoline and headed in. Joel would stay outside and keep watch. Once inside the office, Pat doused the desks and all the cabinets with gas. He mainly focused on soaking the wood, chairs, and computers. He knew that once the fire started, the rest of the place would go up. When he was done, Pat grabbed 2 propane tanks and placed them in the Congresswoman's office. He opened them up slightly, so they'd start to leak, and closed the door. Next, he tossed a match on one of the desks that had a pool of gasoline on it and watched with delight as a red and orange fireball erupted. He couldn't stay long. Pat dashed out to the alleyway and grabbed the pry bar. Once again, he applied pressure to the door frame and closed the door. It was as if they'd never been there. Of course, by now, the flames had grown large enough that the internal sprinkler system had started to go off, along with the fire alarm. "Come on, Pat, we need to go," Joel said urgently as he climbed into the truck. Once Pat was in the vehicle, Joel floored it. They got probably about 2 or 3 blocks away when they heard a thunderous explosion. Joel looked in the rearview mirror and then turned his head around to see the carnage. "Holy crap! That entire place just blew up! What did you put in there?" Pat smiled. "Oh, just a couple of propane tanks for good measure." Joel shook his head. "I think we should go stay at my brother's farm for the night. Get ourselves out of town for a day or 2 until that town hall meeting." "I agree. Let's do it." As Pat pulled into the parking lot of the Herbert Hoover High School, he could tell this town hall was going to be packed. After Congresswoman Lane's office had been destroyed, her staff had announced that her original town hall had been postponed, so there had been time for everyone to digest what had happened. The turnout clearly demonstrated how passionate people were about the events that had transpired. Using his handicapped parking permit for the first time in over a month, Pat managed to find a space relatively easily, despite the crowds. As he filed into the line to get in, it was easy to tell that the people around him were all pretty angry. Some were mad that Lane's office had been bombed, while others were irate that Lane refused to acknowledge the mounting evidence of voter fraud. Pat felt that he could readily tell the difference between the two, regardless of whether they wore anything that gave away their political affiliation. He had personally opted to wear a Senator Tate ball cap to make himself appear less of a threat. Besides anger, the other palpable emotion of the evening was fear. The whole crowd was hopped up on adrenaline one way or the other. To help compensate for the heightened tensions, the police presence had dramatically increased at this event. In the past, there might have been 1 or 2 officers at a town hall, but Pat observed no less than a dozen. And then there were the 2 men in very conspicuous navy jackets with standard yellow FBI lettering on them. As the line moved closer to the door of the high school, Pat spotted a set of metal detectors inside. His heart skipped a beat. He quickly took a deep breath to calm himself. They won't find it, he told himself. The line continued to progress forward, one by one, marching toward the officers at the security check solemnly, as a prisoner might approach his execution. Pat found himself walking through the metal arch. It beeped loudly. One of the officers pointed for him to stand off to the side. "You have any weapons or knives, sir?" asked the man with a polite smile. Pat shook his head, then pulled his left pant leg up a bit to reveal the prosthetic leg that resided where his real one used to be. "Thank you for your service," the police officer responded. Then he waved Pat through without doing any further checks on him. Works every time, Pat thought, holding back a smile. He glanced over to the auditorium. It was already starting to fill up. Pat turned and headed toward the bathroom instead. He made his way over to the handicap stall, locked the door, and sat down. He pulled his pants up a bit and took his prosthesis off. Then he removed the gel padding where his limb stump sat. Underneath, he had hidden his P238 Spartan subcompact pistol, which he now removed. It was a little gun, but the .380 caliber bullets it fired would still get the job done. Holding the gun in his hand, Pat ran his fingers across the Greek phrase "Molon labe," engraved on the side of the slide action. Come and take them, he thought with a smile. He'd been ready to die for his country in Afghanistan. Hell, half of his leg was still over there. And in that moment, he realized he was ready to die for his country again. He placed the subcompact into his weather-worn jacket, reattached his prosthetic leg, and pulled his pants down. Just then, a couple of men walked into the restroom, talking excitedly with each other. Pat flushed the toilet and stood up. He pushed the stall door open and walked up to the sink, going through the motions of washing his hands. As he did, he looked at his face in the mirror. I can do this. I must do this. Pat finished drying his hands, then made his way into the gymnasium. Despite the fact that it was filling up already, he was able to take advantage of the reserved seating for the disabled near the front. The woman next to him bantered with him briefly before she became distracted by her smartphone. Before long, Congresswoman Lane walked in, flanked by a couple of her aides. Chaos erupted. Some of the audience cheered her arrival, others booed, and still others loudly hurled questions at her. Seemingly unflapped, Lane made her way over to a table with several chairs and sat behind it. There was a microphone set up on the center of the table, as well as 2 other wireless microphones, presumably for a Q&A at the end of whatever it was she was about to say or do. Since she didn't take anyone's bait, the crowd eventually calmed down and everyone took their seats. When they did, The Congresswoman grabbed one of the wireless mics and stood, walking in front of the table to be closer to the crowd. "Good morning, everyone," she began. "First, I want to thank you all for coming here to listen to me speak. I also want to thank the FBI and the Des Moines Police Department for providing some additional security for this event. What happened the other day to my congressional office is frankly tragic. Fortunately, no one was there when it blew up, and no one was hurt. But let's not forget this was a premeditated attack on a duly elected representative to Congress. We cannot resort to violence when we disagree with each other. That's what we have elections for. Sadly, our current president won't recognize the results of the last election." Half the crowd immediately booed. "The election was a fraud!" shouted one man. A woman yelled, "Sachs was right! It was rigged!" Somehow, above the raucous crowd, Pat could still hear another man scream, "When are you going to recognize the FBI and DOJ findings of election tampering?" For her part, Congresswoman Lane blew off those cries like a practiced politician. Eventually, as she spoke, the crowd settled back down. She slowly drifted toward Pat's side of the room. He'd heard enough. His right hand was already in his pocket, firmly in control of the pistol. He pulled the gun out slowly and calmly, and then raised his right hand up in a fluid, practiced motion and fired 3 shots. 2 shots hit her chest, and 1 connected with her head before she even knew what had happened. The 3 pistol shots reverberated loudly in the gymnasium. Pat retracted his arm, ready to point the barrel at his own head. He'd already decided he'd rather off himself than be captured. However, his right hand only made it about halfway back before he was tackled from behind and thrown forward into 2 other people. The heap of bodies all landed on the floor with a thud, followed by the pained moans of the man on the bottom of the pile. Then a cacophony of shouts and screams grew in a steady crescendo, echoing off the walls of the gymnasium. Pat desperately tried to regain control of his arm so he could finish the job, but a second set of hands grabbed at his right hand, wresting control of the gun away from him. Then his left hand was yanked behind his back. He felt the sensation of cold metal grasping his left wrist as the man on top of him quickly attached a pair of handcuffs. His right wrist was restrained seconds later. Everything had happened so swiftly. He'd succeeded in killing the Congresswoman, but he'd been unable to end his own life in the process. Why didn't one of the police officers or FBI agents shoot me? He wondered. As he lay there on the floor with a knee in his back, Pat overheard police directing people to exit the auditorium a certain way. Someone else called for an ambulance for the Congresswoman, but Pat already knew she was dead. A reporter who'd hung back shouted, "Why'd you do it?" Pat bellowed, "To honor my oath to defend this country." "Shut up! Don't say another word!" one of the police officers yelled at him. "It won't be the last. This is only the beginning," Pat managed to shout. Then one of the officers kicked him in the gut, knocking the wind out of him. "Come on, let's get this lunatic out of here," directed one of the FBI agents. Gasping, Pat yelled, "Today is just the beginning!" Another officer punched him in the gut, and then he was dragged out of the auditorium, kicking and doing his best to make his message heard. Despite the chaos of rabid reporters shouting questions at him and the officers who were manhandling him, Pat noticed a man who had approached their little gaggle from the parking lot. When the man came within 10 feet of their crowd, he pulled a handgun out of his jacket and fired 6 bullets into Pat and the police officers holding him before he himself was shot and killed by one of the FBI agents. From the Associated Press. A shocking scene unfolded at Congresswoman Jessica Lane's town hall in West Des Moines, Iowa, as one of the attendees managed to smuggle a gun into the event and fire 3 shots at her, killing her instantly. After the assassination, the police and FBI were about to transport the attacker, now identified as Patrick Shea, into federal custody, when a man in the parking lot opened fire on Mr. Shea, who died instantly. 2 of the police officers nearby were also injured, but are now listed as being in stable condition. The police and FBI returned fire and killed the second attacker, now identified as Paul Whitaker. This left 3 dead and 2 injured in less than 10 minutes. From Reuters Online. The assassination of Congresswoman Jessica Lange seems to have inspired multiple copycat attackers. There have been more than 300 killings in the span of a week that have been identified as clearly being politically motivated. Police across the nation are urging calm during this period of heightened tensions, and multiple political leaders have issued statements reminding the public that vigilante attackers will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Chapter 2. Humpty Dumpty. December 10th, 2020. Washington, D.C. White House. Cabinet Room. FBI Director Nolan Polanski and Patty Hogan from DHS exchanged a nervous glance before returning their eye contact to the president. "I don't think you fully understand how bad the situation is getting, Mr. President," Polanski said cautiously. "We've seen an enormous uptick in political and hate crimes being committed against both sides of the political aisle. It's completely overwhelming local law enforcement and my own agency. We need help, and we need it now, Mr. President." Turning to face his Attorney General, the President asked, "How about it, Malcolm? What do you recommend we do?" The AG shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "You've already declared martial law and activated the National Guards in all 50 states, sir. It's going to take time to get them all shifted around the country to their new assignments." SecDef McElroy nodded. "Mr. President, we're also running into the problem of AWOLs inside the Guard units, as well as in the reserves and active military," he asserted. "Close to 20% of the units across the board aren't showing up. We don't know yet if they're just opting not to participate with the deployments, or if they're truly crossing ranks to join the UN and militia forces forming up in Canada." Sachs shook his head in frustration. "This whole situation is spiraling out of control faster than we can react to it. We have to do something to return order to our streets and stop the violence. I need answers, solutions, not more questions and problems, gentlemen," he insisted, his voice slowly rising to a near yell. He took a deep breath and let it out with a huff, then eyed his AG again. "Now, what more can we do to help local law enforcement?" he asked, his voice back to its normal volume and cadence. "We should move forward with Patty's idea of increasing the Federal Protective Service Force," Malcolm insisted. "They have, roughly 1,200 uniformed officers and another 14,000 contractors?" he asked, nodding to Patty. "That's correct," she confirmed. "At this moment, their duties are to protect all buildings owned and operated by the General Services Administration. They're essentially mini police departments on some of our larger facilities. My proposal is that we turn the 14,000 contractors into federal workers, and then we move to rapidly expand that number to 100,000 people over the next 6 months. We can use this force to help augment our local law enforcement officers and FBI agents throughout the country." The president let out a soft whistle. "That's a lot of new cops to essentially create overnight. How do you propose we do that?" he asked skeptically. "Especially when we have a ton of civil unrest happening now, as it is." "We use the draft," Patty proposed. "We work with the Selective Service, and we place a requirement for them to fill it. Of course, we'll also promote it externally and try to get folks to volunteer, but we use Selective Service to fill in the gaps." Leaning forward, General Austin Peterson added, "If we're going to use the Selective Service, then we should also go ahead with temporarily increasing the size of the military. We're clearly facing a national emergency. We have a foreign army starting to amass on our borders, and we have a high percentage of desertions. I'd like to recommend that all soldiers currently in basic training be turned into infantry soldiers, and that we go ahead now and begin the process of drafting at least 500,000 young men into the military." "What about the other military specialties?" asked the SecDef, his left eyebrow raised to an uncomfortable-looking height. Turning to look at McElroy, General Peterson replied, "We can let some of the critical ones continue on to receive their advanced MOS training, but by and large, we're going to need a lot of infantry soldiers. My gut tells me if there's a conflict with this UN force to our north, it's going to be brief and bloody, not a long, drawn-out fight." Sachs nodded. "I agree, General. I think the days of a prolonged battle are probably over, at least when it comes to a conventional force-on-force scenario. Go ahead with your plans, and let's get the Selective Service involved. It's December 10th. I'd like the first round of the draft completed by Friday, December 18th, with a report date of no later than January 3rd. We need to get this force created and going." Havana, Cuba. The weather was absolutely gorgeous as the wind blew some warm, moist air in across the hotel room through the open window. Vice Admiral Hu Zhanshu looked one more time at the disposition of his ship deployments for the Pacific, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Atlantic. This plan was years in the making. It was either going to succeed beyond his wildest beliefs, or it was going to utterly flop and doom his country. For his part, Admiral Hu was either going to be hailed a hero of China or lined up against a wall and shot for his failure. "This is an audacious plan, Admiral," stated Major General Semyon Lobov. "Are you confident it will work?" Admiral Hu stood even straighter than normal, trying to stretch his frame to maximum stature. "It'll work, so long as your missile batteries are able to keep the American Air Force at bay," he replied, both taunting and appeasing his Russian counterpart. For this plan to work, the Chinese and Russians had to work together, hand in glove. It wasn't possible to take down the world's dominant superpower without a lot of coordination and twisting the arms of many smaller, less powerful nations to get them to go along. "The Americans have spent the past 18 years fighting Islamic extremists," General Lobov said dismissively. "Last time I checked, the Taliban doesn't have an air force. We've tested our systems against their aircraft in Syria. They'll work when the time comes." "You've tested your radars and electronic jamming, not your missiles," Hu asserted. "It's going to be imperative that your force be able to drive the American Air Force nuts in the southern half of their country. If you can keep their Air Force and commercial aircraft grounded for even a month, you'll have bought our forces in Mexico enough time to tear the American Southwest apart." "You ought to be more concerned with the Europeans in Canada," Lobov insisted, tossing aside the Chinese admiral's concern. "We Russians know how to fight. We've spent most of our history in one war or another. It's the Europeans who buckle under the weight of a conflict." Admiral Hu snickered at the retort. "You may be right on that account. We'll see if the Germans and French are truly able to fight, or if they're just a paper tiger." Pulling a packet of cigarettes out of his breast pocket, the Russian tapped it against his palm briefly before he pulled one of them out. He bent over slightly and lit it with a gold-plated Zippo lighter he had been given by President Romanov himself. He held the pack out to Admiral Hu, who looked at the cigarette disapprovingly before he grudgingly took one. General Lobov lit it for him, and the two of them stood there in the hotel room, looking at the map on the table before them. General Lobo leaned over the map and examined it before he returned his gaze to Admiral Hu. "You realize, if we are successful in this endeavor, America will never be the same?" Lobov asked, almost rhetorically. We will have altered the world balance for generations in China's favor. Even if we fail, America will never be the same, Hu shot back. And yes, the world balance will shift in our direction, but that is the direction it's been heading for more than 30 years. If we are successful, General Lobov, Russia will prosper along with China. The Europeans will have spent themselves trying to go toe-to-toe with the Americans. Lobov grunted. And all it will have cost Russia is half of our Air Force, most of our Navy, and half of our surface-to-air missile platforms. Crinkling his eyebrows at the glum proclamation, Admiral Hu exclaimed, General, be real. What you are sacrificing is old, outdated equipment, which is costing your country more to maintain than it would to just replace it. You may believe you're throwing this equipment away, but what you're going to gain in return is something far better. Lobov snorted at Hu's dismissive comment. It's not the equipment that bothers me, Admiral. It's the trained men that will be losing with that equipment. China may be a nation with more than 1 billion people, but Russia is not. Your country is being well compensated for its participation in this grand UN endeavor, General, Admiral Hu asserted. This effort is going to succeed. You wait and see. Over the next couple of hours, they finished discussing the defensive plans for how Russia was going to turn Cuba into a massive surface-to-air missile swarm on the Americans. With dozens of S-300 and S-400 missile systems being set up in strategic points around Cuba, the Russians were going to make it nearly impossible for U.S. aircraft to fly over Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and parts of Texas. With the American southeast essentially tied down and the northeast otherwise occupied, that would leave the Chinese to contend with the American southwest. If they could succeed in removing the American Air Force from the equation, then the UN's ground force should be on an equal footing with the United States Army. And that was a horse race they believed they could win. When General Semyon Lobov left his meeting with the Chinese, he turned to his deputy, Colonel Ivan Smirnov. I don't trust the Chinese one bit, he admitted. Mark my words, Ivan. They'll betray us if it suits them, or if they can profit from it. Colonel Smirnov looked surprised. Why do you say that, sir? He asked. Since it was only the two of them in the vehicle, Lobov turned to his deputy. Because China is greedy, he answered candidly. China is also an untested military. They've never fought a serious war where they were looking defeat in the eyes. If they get their nose bloodied, they'll likely back down. I don't trust them, and I think we should make our own preparations in case they double-cross us. Smirnov nodded. No other response was needed. He's a good little soldier, Lobov thought with a smile. Orlando, Florida. Seth Mitchell had planned his family trip to Disney's Animal Kingdom with his usual military precision. The truth was, ever since returning from Yemen, he wasn't that great with lines, so he'd organized the outing to minimize the amount of time spent waiting. They'd arrived promptly at 8:30 a.m., so they were some of the first people to make it into the park when it opened at 9 a.m. Then they'd make a beeline for the new Pandora section of the park, which tended to have the longest wait times. His wife, Dana, was sort of used to Seth's idiosyncrasies at this point, and had downloaded the app to keep up to date on exactly how long each line was, minute by minute. She'd already put the expectation out there with the kids that they probably wouldn't be able to ride the Avatar Flight of Passage ride. Even for her, the wait for that ride was usually too long, and fast passes had been snatched up way in advance. So when she saw that the line for the Navi River journey was remarkably short, she'd hurriedly steered the family in that direction. Seth found himself somewhat distracted by the beauty of his surroundings. Normally, waiting in lines and sifting through large crowds made him feel like he was about to break out in hives. But in this lush setting with greenery and streams, he almost felt like he was being transported to the scene of the movie Avatar. Then he heard some words that jolted him back to reality. "The Navi River journey is currently down for maintenance. We aren't sure exactly how long it will be down, so we are recommending that everyone go to a different ride." Realizing that he shouldn't swear in front of his kids, Seth managed a weird sort of growl instead. However, several people vacated the line right after the announcement, and then there were only about 40 people between him and the entrance of the ride. "I think we should ride this one out, Dana," he told his wife. "Really?" she asked incredulously. "Yeah. Why don't I take Lily to get her face painted at that stand over there while you hold the line with Eric? If we finish and there's no movement, we can trade out." "Okay," Dana said, smiling. Seth walked his daughter over to the nearby kiosk, and soon he was willingly paying over $20 to have his daughter's face decorated in fancy paint that would glow on the ride. Normally he was a bit of a tightwad, but today all that really mattered was the smile on his daughter's face. She was so ecstatic. He tucked the memory of her delighted cheers into the back of his mind, hoping that what was going on in the world wouldn't mean that this was the last of such happy occasions. Just as he and Lily rejoined the line, a crew of drummers showed up and started a performance 20 feet away from where they were waiting in line. "Oh, cool!" Eric exclaimed. "Dad, can you take me a little closer until the line starts moving?" "Sure thing, bud," Seth answered. Truthfully, he didn't like loud music anymore, but for his son, he would deal with the heightened level of anxiety and the elevated heart rate. 5 minutes later, he felt his phone buzz. He checked the screen. It was Dana. "Zip your way on back here fast. We are moving," she announced. Seth grabbed his son's hand, and they joined the herd that was lurching forward toward the line entrance. Soon, they were meandering through a maze of rope lines. To their right and left were many different lanes that could be opened when the waits grew long. Thank God we didn't have to sit through all that, Seth thought. They kept moving along at a rapid clip until they lurched to an end right before everyone boarded the boats. They had totally lucked out waiting for this ride. It was pretty much the best-case scenario. Seth had to admit, it was pretty cool watching his daughter's face paint light up with all the other luminescent displays. However, the slow boat ride wasn't all that exciting for an adrenaline junkie like himself. "I'm so glad we didn't burn a fast pass on this," he mused. The day continued along in an almost ideal, dreamlike state. His wife did shoot him a look when he bought the kids those enormous lollipops, but he calmly squeezed her shoulder, winked, and whispered, "It's Disney, babe." Truthfully, it was hard for Seth to stay mentally present. He kept thinking about where he was going to be sent next, and whether or not he would come back home to see his wife and kids again. What's going to happen to America? He wondered. Then he shook himself back to reality. Keep smiling, he told himself. Give them one perfect day.
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.